Sorry, I don't love you. Afraid I've grown accustomed to. Cause with you something isn't wrong, something isn't wrong, something isn't right. I wish you could be happy.
Hey everyone, welcome to Geekdom is back, and before we dive into today's episode, I want to tell you a little bit about our current sponsor. Support for this podcast comes from Justin Maybe Design. Are you sick of your current website? Is it outdated? Does it need a facelift? Maybe you just wish it worked better. My website was recently redesigned by Justin Maybe Design, and in just a matter of hours, they took my website and made it so much easier to navigate and control. With full website builds, search engine optimization, and a focus on training for all clients, Justin Maybe Design is ready to make your online presence the best it can possibly be. You'll never feel out of the loop ever again. Justin uses Squarespace to create all of his designs. There are no patches or plugins to update, and you never have to worry about making sure your website works correctly. Plus, there are always tutorials and 24/7 support if you ever get stuck. Interested in a website redesign or building your own website from the ground up? Check out justinmaybe.com for a full line of training resources, pricing for full builds, and a blog with tips and tricks to get the most out of your Squarespace site. If you mention this ad, you'll get 20% off your first year of hosting. Again, that's justinmaybe.com, and his last name is spelled Mabee. There will be a link in the show notes, so you can just go ahead and click on that and mention this podcast, and again, you'll get that 20% off for your first year of hosting. And now we are going to go on to today's topic. We're talking all about A Quiet Place today. MJ, how are you doing?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
Doing pretty well. I'm definitely very excited to talk about A Quiet Place because this is a movie that I went into not knowing a whole lot about. I don't think I really started hearing much about this movie until right before it was released. Usually when it comes to big movies, I'm pretty on top of news and everything for them, but because this wasn't, the biggest movie out there as far as the marketing effort and everything goes, it definitely had trailers floating around the internet and everything like that, and it was released at South by Southwest, but for whatever reason, it just wasn't on my radar quite as much as the superhero movies and everything like that, and we've had plenty of those this year already, so I think it kind of just got jumbled in there. But for you, when did you know that you were just dying to see A Quiet Place?
Well, if anybody knows me, I'm a big horror aficionado. I'd start hearing rumblings about it from the South by screenings, and then there was like this weird theory that it was tied into the Cloverfield universe.
Okay, and I know you've talked about those movies quite a bit.
Yeah, and because John Krasinski was actually supposed to be in, I think, Paradox and then he ended up not being in it, and then like people started theorizing like, okay, maybe this is kind of tied in the Cloverfield universe. And if you've seen the movie, you actually could maybe tie that in there. But I was watching the trailers. It definitely, I forgot what movie I saw in the beginning of the year, but I saw it in the trailers, and it was intriguing. And then, like, I don't know, me and a friend saw it in New York, and I loved it. And, I'm pretty hard on horror movies, but this one was pretty good. This one did its job really well.
Yeah, I would say out of the horror movies that I've watched recently, this and Get Out, even though Get Out feels more like a psychological thriller to me than necessarily straight up horror, it's one of those things where, I don't mind watching horror movies like Halloween or Nightmare on Elm Street or anything like that, but those are sort of meant for October consumption, in my opinion. It's like, okay, those are the movies everyone watches around Halloween when they want to get some good horror movies in, or even potentially some bad ones, depending on which ones exactly you watch in the various series. But with A Quiet Place, there's sort of this sci-fi element to it, but it's not overdone to the point where it just becomes a sci-fi movie as opposed to a horror movie. And I think they did a really nice job with that, because I wasn't even really aware of the sci-fi element going into this. And then I saw, I believe, one of the trailers sort of briefly hinted at the sci-fi element. And I was like, okay, I'm warming up to sci-fi movies more and more as I watch things like Arrival and Annihilation and movies like that. But it really surprised me how well done this is. And because there is so little as far as the lines go with the actors in this, it's like you really get this great tension the entire time you're watching it, just because of literally how quiet the movie gets at times. And it was one of those things. I wasn't in the theater with too many people when I watched it, but you still kind of get this overall sense with everyone in the theater. You're like, okay, what is going on here? It's a little too quiet to be comfortable sitting here in this theater right now.
When me and my friend saw it, it was actually really packed, which was surprising to me because it was like 3 weeks after it came out and it was still packed. When that happened, and as we're watching the movie, I look over to my friend and I see that she's really conscious about moving, like even like whispering to me and like asking like a question and stuff like that. Like everybody was like in their seat in this tension, because you really get wrapped up in the movie. Like you really get wrapped up in this family, because there's a family of four, and that's really the only people that you see, and you get involved in kind of protecting them. So you don't want to make any noise in the theater, because it might attract, you think in your head that it might attract the monsters, and which is kind of crazy, like to be so wrapped up in watching a movie that like you basically become the movie. You basically become, that environment. You go into the movie and it starts with very little background.
Right.
Like you see like, newspapers here and there about like the creatures and, not to make any noise and whatnot. But like you're kind of just thrown in. Like it's just kind of like you're just dropped off a plane and like you're into, whatever Earth is now, where it looks like not a lot of people are left. And, you have this family and everything is desolate and whatnot. And the movie starts with, the jarring scene of them losing a son, like losing the littlest.
Right.
And it sets up like this huge arc, which I think is just masterfully done. Like you said, like you mentioned Get Out, and that's funny because that's good, because I felt like that was more Alfred Hitchcock.
Right. Definitely.
I mean, of course it definitely had the horror element in here. Here, like, of course there's like a horror and sci-fi element that it is, but it's also more emotional. Like there's like this emotional connection to the family and what they've gone through, to the point where you feel really bad. You feel for them. You feel for each person with this loss. You know what I mean? So like, especially you're in a world where you can't really like express it. Like you can maybe sign about it, whatnot, and like you'll see it more like towards the middle of the movie, but like you can't really say what you feel because you might die.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring up seeing it in a packed theater and your friend not really wanting to do anything at all, because I definitely felt that way, but I had a very different viewing experience than you did, I think, just because, I get there and I go buy my ticket with MoviePass. It's a little sunny out, so it's a little hard to see, the screen to pick your seats. And so I just pick one in the back row, because there's only like 7 or 8 rows in a lot of the theaters at the theater by me. And I get to my seat, someone's sitting in my seat in this like more than half empty theater. I think there were maybe 10 people in the theater. And so he just gets up and moves to the other side of his girlfriend or wife or whoever. And I sit in my seat. So then I'm sitting next to this couple with a small child the entire movie. And I probably should have moved, but I was like, whatever, this is the seat I picked, I'll deal with it. And there was like a dog in the theater and another small child, and it was just a very strange thing all around. And I was like, oh well, whatever, I'm gonna sit here and I'm gonna watch this and I'm going to enjoy it. And obviously I did, but I did have moments when I was sitting there and I was like, am I breathing too loud? Like, should I just like not breathe during this moment? And it's definitely one of those movies that it feels like an immersive experience because you just get so into what's going on the screen because of how quiet it is. It's not one of those movies where you get into the theater and you're like, wow, they are playing this way too loud. I would like to keep my eardrums intact by the end of this movie. Instead, it was the complete opposite. Even when you do have loud moments, it didn't feel like it was too overdone.
Well, first of all, I'm sorry about your theater experience. I don't think that was a movie that you would bring a toddler to.
Thankfully, the one next to me slept pretty much the whole time. I think he only woke up when he wanted some sips of soda, so it wasn't too bad. And then the other child, made noises here and there, but for the most part the parents actually kept the children quiet, which I appreciated because a lot of times that's not the case. And the dog was quiet too, so I almost forgot there was a dog in there, which that's just weird in itself because it wasn't like a service dog or anything. It was just like this little white dog. I was like, what is going on?
Yeah, that's probably like my, Infinity War experience where there were just kids just running around and whatnot. That's kind of crazy. In my theater, we got seats to the back and we were hoping that like nobody sat next to us. But of course, like at the last minute, like two people just come and just like, all right. But they stayed pretty quiet and whatnot. I think, especially as a first-time director, John Krasinski did a hell of a job, especially because each character was able to express really emotion without using words. Like you kind of like they use signing, and especially Reagan. She's the actress. I think her name is Millicent Simmons.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if I got her name wrong.
No, that's her name.
She's actually deaf.
Right.
And I thought that was like her journey and her not being able to speak and like her verbalizing and whatnot. She had it the hardest. She was the one who gave her little brother the toy. And, he got killed. And then she's having this relationship with her dad where she feels like he blames her for that. And she's kind of like trying to prove herself of worthy of love, basically. And it's interesting because, you see this journey and with your friends and your family, you could say it to them like, I love you, blah, 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 like that. I didn't mean that, that's okay, blah, blah, blah. Because they're in such a like pressure situation, you basically have to hunt without sound, which is weird. You know what I mean? Like you think like if you see like deer or whatnot, like you would have to like, kill them and stuff like that. But like even the slightest bit of sound will put you in danger. These monsters, boy, it's like as soon as you drop something, as soon as like you step on a twig and stuff like that, here they come, boom, dead. Like, and I just thought that was a brilliant casting choice. And then you had Marcus, who's like the younger brother, who, well, yeah, he's the oldest son. He has to be brave. He has to find his way, with Lee, his dad, and like be brave in a world where like it's scary as hell. Like, can you imagine being like, I guess they're probably like 10 years old, like 10, 11, whatnot like that, and being in a world where like, all right, well, I have to, hang red light bulbs in case of danger happens, and my mom is pregnant, and like I don't know, like with pregnancy, like will she be able to survive, even though she's a doctor? I can imagine like that's very jarring for them. And maybe like here, you don't really know because you get dropped kind of like in the middle of it if they know a world without the monsters first. Maybe they kind of know. Maybe this is the world like that they know. But I would imagine as a kid, like I would like, whoa, like what the hell?
Yeah, you mentioned that this was Krasinski's directorial debut, and I believe it's also the first time him and Emily Blunt were in a movie together. And the fact that he was then directing it too, that's something that's worth talking about as well, because in real life, they are married. They are married in this. So, it definitely shows you just how well they work together pretty much on and off the screen in this movie. And Krasinski did a very nice job going out and seeking out the right child actors for this, because he specifically said that he didn't want a non-deaf actress playing the daughter. He wanted someone who was actually deaf and could teach him about what they go through and everything like that. So it definitely gave it that sort of authenticity to the performance. And then with the older son, Marcus, who is played by Noah Jupe, I hope I'm pronouncing that last name correctly. I don't know, but he was in the Night Manager miniseries and Suburbicon. So he had been in these bigger productions already, even though in the Night Manager, he wasn't necessarily a big focus in the show. He sort of just popped up here and there. And I honestly have not seen Suburbicon to know what his role was in that, but he did a nice job, like you said, putting on that brave face and just trying to do everything he could. And I think they do know a life without the monsters, because you could always see the younger brother who, makes the noise at the beginning of the movie. He knows that if you put batteries in this thing, it's going to make noise. And he doesn't really understand why he can't make noise anymore. So that's sort of what told me that they might have just gone through this thing recently where the monsters took over.
Oh, true. Yeah, there's like numerous there's like radio, like I remember like there's radio things and then there's newspapers and whatnot. You mentioned John. You mentioned John. Why do I keep on forgetting her name? Emily Blunt. Yeah, Emily Blunt. Yeah, I don't know why I keep on forgetting her name. But anyway, their marriage in real life actually played off amazing in the movie, because you really feel like there was a scene where like they have the iPod and she gives him one earbud and they're dancing and it's so sad.
Right.
Like, yeah, like it's beautiful, but it's sad. And you felt like the genuine love there. When I was watching the movie, one of the things that I really, really thought, and like what came to my mind, is this whole movie is like one big metaphor for basically being a parent. Of course, you have the monsters and you have whatnot, but I felt like you could kind of look at the monsters in a different way, as in like, all right, I have a parent, I have kids. There's a great big world out there with a bunch of stuff that I don't know. I can only protect my children so much. You know what I mean? Like I can only do so much, but at the end of the day, the wilderness and whatnot and whatever is out there can still get them. And I felt like that panic and I felt like that pressure that they had, because they're doing whatever they can to survive. It's almost like going back in like to the 1800s where they like having natural childbirth and stuff like that, and like living off the land and whatnot. But like at the same time, like you could do whatever you want, you can make all the safeguards you want. One flick of like fate and whatnot, like just like you saw in the beginning of the movie with the batteries and whatnot, like you could lose your child. And like that really struck me. That emotional aspect of the movie I thought was really done well, and I thought that was kind of like the main point of the movie. Like, of course, like there was the horror and whatnot, and this, but like that point actually was like my favorite plot point in the movie.
I do want to talk about a few specific scenes here before we dive into the ending, which I wasn't really expecting at all. But one of the moments that he has with the son when they're going out and looking for food and catching fish and everything like that, he takes him up underneath the waterfall and he sort of just lets out this big yell. And he's showing the boy that if there is a noise louder than you, it's fine to make noise. And you see the hesitation with the son, and then you see the relief when he finally gets to say something and just sort of yell from behind this waterfall. And I think that was a really well done moment, because with both of them, it's like you just sort of feel the weight being lifted off of them, even if it's only briefly.
I like how they played back into that when Evelyn is in the basement and the monster like broke into the house,
right?
And she backs into like the running water, and like the monster can't hear her, right, or whatnot. Like I love that, like they played into that again. Like going back to the scene, that was definitely a bonding moment that they needed to have, because it played into the story of, you know, Regan and whatnot, and because Regan can't speak, you know what I mean? Like Regan is deaf, so it's like Marcus is kind of like her mouthpiece, and he's telling his dad, like, you know, she thinks you hate her, like she thinks that you're blaming her for, you know, Bo dying, and he's like, no, like I don't, and whatnot. And also like going back to the yelling and whatnot like that, felt like it was kind of like one of the only instances where you hear dialogue. So I felt like it was like them kind of like letting off steam. Like everything in this movie is almost like a powder keg that is ready to just erupt. And them talking and them kind of going in a deeper what happened at the beginning of the movie, it was just kind of like a sigh of relief. And I felt like it was a sigh of relief for us too, and the audience. Like, oh, I could, you know, maybe move around a little bit more, because now there's like maybe a little bit more liberty with sound and whatnot. Like it was a reprieve for the audience too.
One of the other moments that I wanted to talk about too is when they are making the soundproof crib basically for the baby when the baby comes, and you see them preparing all of these things so that she can have the baby, and then the baby can have a place to sleep without, you know, alerting all of the creatures. And it's really well done, just how it's really an effort on everyone's part. And you have other little moments like when she steps on the nail, and most people would probably scream or yell out or something, make some sort of noise if they stepped on a nail. And with Evelyn, she knows that she cannot do that, but all she could do is just kind of warn everyone else that the nail is there so that, you know, one of the kids doesn't step on it, because they would surely scream if they stepped on a nail, probably.
That was a really good scene too, because it was one of the scenes in the movie where it built up suspense. Like there's instances that come later, especially with the monsters and like, you know, everybody trying to, you know, hold their breath and like, oh my God, like these things are like right here, like one false move and they're just going to chop me in half. You're like, oh man, like you said, like if you step on a nail, I'm probably gonna curse. Like I'm probably like me. Like I don't know if I would scream, but I would definitely let loose a few F words and whatnot. And also, I was thinking, I'm like, damn, like I know she's a doctor, but like she's gonna need like a tetanus shot. Like how are you gonna get that in this movie? Like I don't know. That was kind of weird, but like yeah, that was one of the instances where it was like this slow build of suspense. It wasn't kind of like you mentioned on like Friday the 13th, like this big, like it's like this big creeping feeling of despair coming. Like, I'm like, oh man. And especially when she went into labor and the monster was right there, I'm like, oh man, like this is where she's gonna die, isn't she? And I'm like, nah, don't kill the mom. But she ended up being all right, and I'm like, okay, well, I don't know how she pulled that off because I imagine, childbirth is very excruciating, especially in this, world where you can't scream, you can't do anything, whatnot. Like it feels very repressive.
Yeah, plus there's probably not a whole lot of medicine or anything left too, because we see them at the very beginning. They're kind of rummaging through what is left of probably a general store or something like that. They're in a pretty isolated area. It's definitely a very small town vibe. So we don't really know a whole lot about what happened to everyone else and why they're the only ones we're seeing around here. And, you have that moment where they have the fire up on top of, I forget where they're sitting. It's like on one of those, it's not a water tower, but it's like the thing that holds the grain and everything like that. And they have this little fire going, and you can see some others in the distance. So it's like you kind of know there are at least some other people out there who are doing the same thing. And that's kind of like their signal, I guess, like, hey, we survived another day. And it's just one of those things where you don't really need to see anyone else in this movie to be satisfied with it by the end of it, because you get that little glimpse there, and you get this idea with how bare the store is in some sections that, okay, clearly other people have taken things from here, and that's why they're sort of just getting whatever they can at the beginning of the film, because they obviously will have a supply of fish and everything from the river, and it's hard to tell if the creatures go after any noise that isn't made by a human. So that's something to consider too, because it's like, well, theoretically, if the fish sort of jump out of the water and go back in, wouldn't they be making noise, or would the river be too loud for the creatures to even notice? I have no idea. Now I have all sorts of thoughts on this movie that I didn't have initially, but it's just one of those things where this movie makes you think a lot more than I would say most horror movies do, because this isn't a horror movie in the sense where the jump scare is the goal. This is one where they're going to walk you through this thing and make you hold your breath, and then at the very end, they'll surprise you, but not in the same sense that, something like I said earlier, Halloween or Nightmare on Elm Street intends to.
Yeah, I like that they did that. Like, it wasn't like, I walked downstairs and, oh my God, like the monster's there. You know what I mean? Like, it's very, it's kind of like shot where you're walking with them and you feel all like the anguish with them as they mess up and whatnot, and they hear the things, and now, okay, now I have to, like, it's like a video game. It's like one of those video games like Silent Hill or Resident Evil and stuff like that, where you try to not make noise because like the big bad monster or plant monster or whatnot is like around the corner, and you only have like a finite amount of health. Like it felt like that. You mentioned that when they did the lights and they saw other people in the distance, I found that interesting because it's like, it's two different things. Like, it's the world is big, and yeah, there are other people out there, but can I get to them? And how do I even communicate with them? Like, the thing is, like, they don't meet. They meet one other guy, and it's
Right,
like this
yes.
this older man in the woods. I have no idea why he screams. Like, I just found like that was kind of like a dick move, but you don't meet anybody else, so you don't know, if it's like, The Walking Dead, where like, can I trust everybody? Like, are people going to try to like kill me to survive somehow for my supplies? Because like you said, like when they went into the store, it was slim pickings.
Right.
Like they were trying to find medicine and whatnot, and try to find things, but you can imagine, over time things rot. Medicines aren't really effective, and it's tough. Like, you have to like worry about these monsters, but then again, like, maybe they go into this in the sequel. Maybe it's also the humans that you got to fear too. Like, it's also human nature when you're in a dire state that like humans, a dog eat dog type thing. So, maybe we'll see that down the road. I don't know.
Yeah, so why don't we go ahead and sort of discuss what takes us into the big ending for the movie. Basically, what happens is, the creatures are coming and she's about to have the baby. And, at one point, Lee is out and he's just sort of nowhere to be found. The kids don't really know where he is. So they run and get to the silo, which is the word I was looking for earlier, the grain silo. There we go. And they try and light a fire to sort of let it be known where they are because, everyone goes in separate directions at this point. And you have the son trying to stay alive in the field. You have the daughter looking for him, finding him, getting to the silo, and then the whole incident where he falls into the silo and starts sinking. So, you finally get this moment where, okay, she's had the baby, her and the baby are fine. They're in the house. They're barely hanging on here. And the two kids are elsewhere, and the creatures are coming for them at all angles at this point. And what did you think of basically the build up? Because this is where I feel like things really hit the most intense point in the movie. You have all of this stuff happening and you don't have the family all together. So it's like, okay, what's going to happen to this person? What's going to happen to the kids? And what is going on? Because right off the bat, you already lose one of the kids. So it's like, okay, are they going to kill everyone off by the end of the movie or what? And, obviously that is not the case, but they still find a way to make the ending surprising in a sense.
Well, during the labor scene, initially for sure thought like the mom was I'm like, oh, she's gonna bite the big one here. And then that didn't happen. And then you had something where the cochlear implant, where like it actually like made the monsters crazy, whatnot. Like the sound like and like interfered with like I guess like their hearing or whatnot because they're blind,
right?
So like they use like hearing to go to what their targets or whatnot. So like Reagan's like cochlear implant makes them crazy and whatnot. The silo, that was pretty crazy. I'm like, all right, well, they're either going to die by suffocation from grain or the monster's just going to dive in and kill them. And they ended up, surviving and whatnot. The last scene with Reagan and Lee, I had a feeling that somebody was going to like sacrifice themselves. I didn't think that the family was going to initially come out unscathed. Right. I just didn't. Like somebody had to take the ultimate sacrifice, and who better to do it but Lee? And that was kind of the way to show Reagan, like, I love you. You know what I mean? Like, and he signs it to her, and it feels sad. And then the monster just comes and just whacks him and kills him. I'm like, man, that sucks. Like, because he, in this movie, like, Lee is the ultimate everyman. You know what I mean? Like, he hunts, he goes and he tries to, like, distract the monsters and whatnot. Like, and, like, now you had, Evelyn, Reagan, and Marcus like alone until the big ending where the implant just goes crazy and then Evelyn just shoots them with the shotgun. I was like, there's instances in movies where you're like, yeah, but like you couldn't really say it because it's a quiet place. You're really trying to like keep quiet and whatnot. And then there was the ending where they went outside and then there's like 50 million monsters coming to where they were going. I'm like, oh man, like, are they gonna die? Like, are they gonna be able to like fight everybody off? She only has like a certain amount of bullets. Like, is she gonna be able to just like kill every single one? I thought like instead of it being a horror ending, like like everybody dies or what, like it was really well done. It was well done to draw you in to like feeling really sad because I feel like they've recently said that they were developing a sequel for, but like this could really have been like the end of the story, and then all right, well, like everything continues, but they found a way to like fight off the monsters now. Like now they could kind of survive. Yeah, I thought the ending was real. I really liked the ending. Like I didn't hate it. Like I'm like this is the route they could have went.
I really loved what they did with the implant because it takes Reagan a few times of it happening to realize that it's having an effect on the creatures as well, because she sort of rips it off because it's hurting her. And at that point, I think the first 2 or 3 times it happens, she doesn't realize the effect it's having on anyone other than herself. So then, by the end of the movie, it clicks. But at that point, her dad is already sacrificing himself. So it's like, a little too late. So in a way, I feel like, she's going to feel guilty about that as well. But what Lee does at the end is just, he has complete faith in his family that they are going to be able to take care of one another. The kids, like you said, they're not that old. They're not even like high school age yet. And they have all of this responsibility. And now with a newborn in the picture, there's going to be a lot for those kids to do just to be able to help their mom out with the newborn and just providing for the family in general. But at that moment, he feels like he has prepared his family as well as he possibly could. And Reagan is really smart. You see when Lee is gone that she's messing around with some of the equipment that he has and everything like that, and the implants, and trying to make things work. So she's definitely very resourceful. And I think that's why, he felt like if anyone was going to sacrifice themselves, it would be him.
Yeah, and there was even like a small moment where she goes down in the basement and she sees all like the prototypes and all the research that Lee was doing.
Yeah.
And she got like really, she's like, oh, my dad did love me. Like, look, like he was he was really trying to help me, because there was like an instance in the beginning of the movie where he gave her the cochlear implant. She's like, it's not going to work. Like, it never works. And he's like, dude, I tried this, like, give this a shot. And then she just gets frustrated and just throws it. Like, hey, like, come on, like, give up. And like, I love that it was full circle, even though she lost him. Like, she could see like the fruits of his labor. Like, he was really trying to help. Like, he was like doing like research, like reading books and like trying like all these different like cochlear prototypes to try to help her. And like, man, like, yeah, it was like, I felt like it was his final gift to them inadvertently, because I don't think he knew that like that would be the thing that put the monsters down. But it was a nice little touch.
Yeah. Well, are there any other scenes or anything that you want to talk about? Because before we close out here, I do want to just talk some numbers with this film.
Oh no, I enjoyed the movie. I probably like when it comes out on DVD or digital, I'm definitely gonna like give it another watch and whatnot. Like, I'm not really sure about the sequel. Maybe they broadened it. Maybe they, like you said, like now, like the family has like a newborn, so that's another wrinkle into what can happen. Maybe we'll learn more about the monsters and where they came from. But yeah, this was John Krasinski, man. Bravo! This was a really good first entry in directing. Like, you know what I mean? Like he definitely knew his stuff, and like he made a really heartfelt movie. Emily Blunt, all the acting on everybody's part was just really good. especially when you have a movie with an absence of sound. It was just really, really acted well.
Yeah, I agree. And I just wanted to bring up the numbers here real quick because when you think of horror movies, you know they're not going to be the biggest movie on any given week really in the at the box office because we constantly have movies like, Star Wars and Marvel movies coming out, but this had a budget of around $20 million give or take, and it made over 300 million at the box office. So I think that's definitely something to be proud of with this movie too, because with horror and especially with rated R movies in general, and I don't know if this was rated R, this might have been PG-13. I'm not entirely sure on that, but
It is PG-13.
okay. And that's probably partially because they don't really talk a lot. So they don't say words that could bump it up to a rated R film, but it's still one of those movies where it's not really a family movie. So while there were small children in my theater, that's probably not the norm as far as the demographic goes for this movie. So it's one of those things where you're like, okay, well, how well is a movie like this going to do? And I was really glad to see it doing so well. And, maybe 312 million isn't huge by like Disney standards, but for a movie like this, it doesn't have to be. This is definitely a very successful movie, and I kind of hope we see more movies like this and Get Out in the future.
Oh yeah, that's kind of been the trend with horror movies like for a little bit. That's even dating to like Paranormal Activity, where they only made it for like thousands of dollars or maybe stuff like that, and it makes 100 and something million, or Split, or like Get Out, where like they only make it for like a small amount of budget, and it goes on to be a phenomenon and whatnot. I like the contrast because we got hit over the head recently with like a lot of big budget movies.
Yeah.
It was Infinity War, and then after Deadpool 2, and then it was Solo. So it felt like, all right, before all that, like, and you had Black Panther around that time. So like before all that, it was like, I kind of need a breather a little bit. And it's good to see like there's a market for like these smaller budget movies. And it's telling where, because a lot of people went back to go see it a second time, where word of mouth and things like that, like, hey man, you have to go see this movie, like, hey, like, this is really, really good. And it built momentum where like I said, like I saw it in week 3, and the movie was still packed. It was like Saturday afternoon. If you make a good movie, like you said, like, I know me and you are like huge fans of Get Out and whatnot. People will go see it for like, once or maybe twice, and like then tell their friends about it, and then they'll go see it. I love this with horror now, where we're getting original narratives and not really going to reboot, where like it's like, oh, we need another Jason movie, and we need, another Freddy movie. Like, you're giving people like Jordan Peele, like John Krasinski, like reins to tell these stories that not only, like a bit like gory and stuff like that, but that's not really the main point. The main point is the plot, and like how it resonates with you, and how it kind of resonates on a personal level. Like, I love this trend. I hope they keep it up, because God knows we have enough $200 million budget movies that we kind of like get bludgeoned with summertime, wintertime, whenever, and whatnot.
I'm really hoping that just because of the success of this and Get Out, they don't start to up the budget too terribly much on these movies too, because I feel like sometimes a really big budget can ruin a movie. And I feel like, something like this in the 20 million range, that isn't a huge blockbuster movie budget. And this movie still did really well. So I would love to see them just sort of keep it consistent and not go in a direction where they have too much of a budget and end up ruining movies like this. So, you mentioned the reboots too, and I feel like TV is doing a lot of reboots right now. And we don't even really need to get into that because we can go down a whole rabbit hole on that. But
yeah, that's a whole other can of worms.
It's one of those things where you're like, okay, this is the sweet spot. So let's just stay in this sweet spot for a while and not mess it up.
Well, I mean, like, I'll make an example, and I feel like a lot of people were divided on it and whatnot. Like, Deadpool 1 had a modest budget. Like, and I like Deadpool 1 a lot more, I felt, because it was Ryan Reynolds' movie, you know what I mean? Like, it was, there was like a narrow scope that it had. And then when they increased the budget, I felt like it was kind of all over the place. Like, there was so much. They're like, okay, we have so much money now. Like, we could do all this and whatnot. Like, with A Quiet Place and like movies like that, like, I feel like when you like, not saying like narrow what can you do, or maybe like you only need X amount of dollars or whatnot. It kind of like, all right, well, we have to get creative with what we have. So you don't need like these big, effects and these Michael Bay like, explosions and what. You're there to tell a story. You're there to get the audience involved, and simple things like, sound and emotion, and that comes into play without all the glitz and glamour. So yeah, I agree with you completely. Like, I hope that like the studios don't go, all right, we need bigger stuff. Like, we need bigger monsters now. We need, more people. We need this and that and blah, blah, blah. Like, we need more of this. Like, just let like directors kind of do their thing and tell their story.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, MJ, for coming on to talk about this. After I saw it, I was like, oh, this is definitely going to be a podcast topic at some point. And like you said, I'll probably rewatch it when it's on digital or something, just because, initially when I watched it, I walked out, I gave it a 3.5 out of 5, which I think is what I also gave Deadpool 2 recently. So I might have to rethink that there, because I do think I enjoyed this a bit more than I enjoyed Deadpool 2. And I know they're two completely different movies, so it's hard to compare them. But like you said, with the budget on Deadpool, the first one, I looked it up, it had a budget of about 58 million, and this one nearly doubled with 110 million. And I'm not entirely sure I saw like a $50 million difference with these two movies to justify that kind of budget. So it's definitely a fine line here in the movie business. But again, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, no problem. It's always a pleasure.
And to our listeners, as always, thank you all for listening, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
See you.